Okay, it looks like we got the Minnesota folks back ready to present, but I'll give folks another minute here in case they're still wandering.
Hey, I did it, Katie. Thank you.
Great. I'm glad it worked for you, Cynthia.
I don't use Zoom too often, or I'm on Zoom, so no.
Oh, we
You
learned
learn
something new. Yeah.
Exactly. You learn something new every day.
Every day.
I'm just curious if folks see the presenter view with the notes or if you see the full screen.
It looks like, I think, the presenter view. There's
Yes.
like a
Okay.
clock
Yeah.
and
Right.
There
How
you
about
go.
that?
There
Okay.
you go.
Yep.
All
There you
right.
go. Have it.
Give me 1 second. I'm gonna.
okay, I think we got most of our folks back. Welcome back for our final presentation. Excited to have the team from University of Minnesota share a bit about the competency model, the NCHL competency model, and kind of how that's shaped and evolved their program over time, and with some field to practice, conversations in there as well. So excited to hear from them, and I'll let them introduce each of themselves.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jen. And we are honored to be asked to present about this topic. And I just should say that, I mean, we're not the be all end all experts about this topic. We're learning as we go along, and we've been adapting, and, we've gotten to a certain point, and just felt that, yes, it would be great to have some conversation about some of these things, but, I'm sure there are some of you here who perhaps are using it in novel ways, and we want to learn from you as well. And there are perhaps some who know little, if anything, about the competency model framework. So we want to talk about that today. So I want to get started by introducing our team, and we're kind of unique at Minnesota in a way. Our leadership in our MHA program is truly a team, as we operate as a team. I was thinking about group coaching. We might benefit from some group coaching on occasion too. And I should say, to start out, I felt like as we were planning for this, it was like, okay, competencies. Oh my, that's a right topic. Considering we have 3 hours of some really interesting presentations and topics that we have covered. And where is the thread here? And I'll tell you, after this last presentation, I just really see threads throughout this. So I hope we can have some conversations about that in the threads in this 3-hour webinar. So we're delighted to be here. Well, I'll introduce myself first, and then I'll ask each one of our team members if they'll introduce themselves. My name is Katie White. I am an associate professor in health policy and management within the School of Public Health here at the University of Minnesota. I've been on faculty since 2008, teaching in the MHA program. And I was asked a year ago by Jean Abraham and our dean if I would if I would take over the interim MHA director role, because our dean had retired, our division head moved to interim dean, and Jean moved to interim division head. Now this year, that's all changed. Our dean is still interim, but Jean has become our division head, which we're all delighted about, and I agreed to take on the role as program director in March. So I'm delighted to be here with you to talk about this. I'm probably the person on the team who knows the least about how all of these competencies got put together, but we'll have a great conversation. So Stephanie, you're to the right here in the slide. Do you want to go?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Hagel. I'm the Director of Student Services in the MHA program. My scope of work in the school extends into our division, so I oversee the teams in the PhD, MS, and MPH programs as well. My background is in higher education. I've been at the university. How long have I been here? I think 16 years, 17 years, and then I was at another local university for about 10 years before that. So my background is working with graduate students, in particular in the healthcare business space. So I'm excited to talk you through a little bit with the rest of my team on competencies today. Nice to meet you. Ryan.
Hi all, Ryan Armbruster. I'm part of the leadership team here and I oversee our executive track for the program.
Hey everyone, nice to see some familiar faces. Justine Mishik. I'm leading many of the efforts with the whole team on the residential tracks and excited to be here today.
And I will tell you, Justine is Associate Director of the program, and Ryan, of course, has the Executive Track program. And Stephanie as well teaches with us. She's teaching professional development, and she's really the only one who has the educational administration background professionally, which is kind of nice. So she keeps us honest here. So that's our team. So next slide, Justine, if you would.
Okay, get
So
this
give
going.
you
There
a
we
little
go.
background here. Of course, we have to get our gophers in. We always do that in every presentation in Minnesota. It's kind of crazy. But I thought it'd be good to have a little context. Why did we decide to engage in competency models? And so, sort of a good analogy here with our Goldie and little Goldie, and thinking about, you know, sitting there at the edge of the team or edge of the field, and watching the action, learning from each other, but learning while watching what's happening on the team. But you know, big Goldie's learning as well from little Goldie. Little Goldie's learning not only how it works on the field, but learning a lot from big Goldie. So that's kind of the idea. So we really have a set of skills that we're looking to build in our program with our students, and behaviors that we coach to in order to prepare, you know, emerging professionals in healthcare leadership. However, we're not really looking to clone students. We seek to personalize, individualize, really build on their strengths, help foster growth in areas where they have passions and where their values align. So all of these things pulled together seem to make so much sense for us to utilize a competency model, which we're utilizing. Additionally, as you all know, you know, the field changes rapidly. So what a great way to assure that the competency process and review process that we have really helps us keep up to date with what's happening in the field, helps us adapt, helps shape our curriculum on a regular basis. And it's a wonderful way to provide a good starting point for any curriculum review. For sure, anything that we do with our industry stakeholders, and making sure industry stakeholders are intimately involved with the definition of competencies is really helpful. Now, we decided to do this across our programs, and some of you might have some questions about the differences in how we apply it, because we have residential, but we also have the executive program. So you have a number of differences across those two programs. I won't go into those now, but we had to think about the competency model and its execution across both of those programs. So a little bit of background, briefly, of course, about NCHL model for those in particular who are not familiar, but the National Center for Healthcare Leadership, of course, has this competency model that was originally developed in 2001 and validated by an interdisciplinary subject matter expert group. It was then refined in collaboration with industrial and educational psychologists. And it's meant to cross education and practice. And the later models, 2.0 and 3.0, which are represented in the slide, to capture all of those complexities and the dynamic quality of a healthcare leadership role. The university has been involved in each iteration, actually, of the development of this model from the very beginning, with model 1.0 not being represented here. But that came about soon after the IOM report, To Err is Human, and with the Hayes Group and now Korn Ferry was developed. And then in about 2005, with some input from industry and other academics, Dr. Sandy Potoff, who was our program director, and Andy Garman and others, some of whom are still, you know, involved in this group, actually put together and validated the 2.0 model, which you see here represented 2.0, in which you will see healthcare leadership in the very middle and our Venn diagram of the 3 circles with the domains, and the 3 domains, of course, being transformation, execution, and people. And those remain today in model 3.0, which is represented to the right. However, what you see now that's a little different, there are 28 competencies. I won't go into those because my team will do that. There were 26 competencies in the prior models. There are now 28. And what you will see is the representation of the 2.0 model now is really embedded in something that is called boundary spanning. And as well, you see to the side, there are action competency domains. So all of those competencies you saw previously under transformation, execution, and relations, now it's called, exist in a action competency domain. And then below it, you see the health system awareness and business literacy and self-awareness and self-development sitting on top of what is really the foundation and the core, which is values, professional, organizational, and personal. And these are enabling competency domains. So that's what the model looks like today. So this addition is something we're working towards at the University of Minnesota with all the work that we're doing, in particular with population health, with social determinants of health, all of those kinds of things in mind within our curriculum. So it'll be interesting to hear from others about what are some of the things that you are doing. So about our application of the competency model at Minnesota. So the program at Minnesota is a competency-based model. It's for our professional degree program that seeks to develop leaders of high performance organizations in a value-focused health system. So the MHA program first adopted the National Center for Healthcare Leadership competency model in the mid-2000s. So we've been working with it for quite a number of years, after having served as a pilot, actually, for the creation of the initial version. So we utilize the competency-based model approach to learning per the accreditation requirements, of course, specified by the Commission of the Accreditation on Healthcare Management Education. But in addition, I think we do some additional things that you'll hear a little bit about. So in 2018, when the 3.0 model was released, that really provided us really an opportune time to think about how to reevaluate what we were doing in our use of the competency model. So following discussions with our faculty, with some of the NCHL leadership, and some analysis of a survey, some data that was collected in a convenient sample of alumni practitioners at various stages in their careers, we revised our model to more closely align with the current competencies in the 3.0 model that we believe our students can realistically develop while they're pursuing their graduate education. And so what we want to do now is talk a bit about how we've adapted that a bit further and how we execute around these competencies. So I'm going to turn it over to Justine to talk about these aspects.
Great, thanks, Katie. I know many of us here are familiar with the NCHL competency model. And over the last month or so while preparing for this, we tried to dig a little deep into some of the history and the facts. So if we don't have all the names that were involved or the years exactly correct, happy to take corrections, but I think we did the best we could with the history and documentation that we have to date. Here are the current 3.0 competencies listed here. There's 28. And so we took a look at these and took into consideration, as Katie said, our faculty, our alumni, our students, and augmented, and the CEF competencies for our public health, since we're in the school of public health, and created a NCHL based competency model that looks like this. There's 5 domains and 23 competencies. And so you'll see here that we have knowledge of population health, healthcare delivery and financing, business literacy and analytical thinking, managing and leading in complex organizations and environments, healthcare transformation and professionalism. And under each one of those, you can see on the right are the competencies, to which some of them exactly match the NCHL list that we just looked at, and others are augmented a bit based on, again, our history and the current state. And we'll talk a little bit about some specific ones around DE&I a little bit later in the presentation. How do we know if our students are achieving the competencies? Like many of you and organizations and education, we adopted Bloom's taxonomy to look at a model to understand how to explain to students and to provide an assessment tool for faculty on student attainment of the competencies. And so where we landed with what that looks like is originally, these are our legacy levels. So they are based on Bloom's, but they were very general and generic, and we were having trouble having conversations amongst ourselves, meaning faculty, staff, and then also with students around these generic low, medium, high labels. I think there was some unintended consequences of using this scale that was could be perceived as a bit judgmental or sort of non-specific. So we looked to say, how could we better describe our competency attainment levels, and ended up here. So instead of low, medium, high, we have emerging, progressing, proficient, and advanced. And we've looked at every course, every competency, and assigned an ideal level of attainment. And most of the levels fit into 1 through 3. We really view the advanced as typically something that happens in fellowship and into practice. And so we want there to be some room for students to know that graduate school is going to help them with their attainment of these competencies, but the journey doesn't stop in graduate school. And some of the courses and the competencies are even at a level 2. Stephanie, I don't know if you want to add anything. I saw you go off mute.
No, that looks
Okay.
great. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So with that, here's an example. There's a lot of matrices here that we're going to show you. And so we do have some pictures of Goldie Gopher intertwined in between to keep people engaged. But another matrix here is how we did our competency. And then we looked across the 2 years of our program and understood how many courses we have driving each competency, and then what our program goal was for proficiency. Because as you can imagine, we didn't want to run into some courses, in year 1, wanting students to get up to a 2, and then in year 2, they're listing 1. So we needed to look at it holistically from a bird's eye view. So this is how we did that. So with that, what we wanted to do, and I'm going to pass it to Stephanie now, is provide you 2 use cases on how, once we adopted the competencies, once we mapped them, how we actually use them in relationship to 2 in 2 areas, for course improvement and for student improvement. So with that, I'll hand it off to Stephanie.
Thank you. So as Justine said, we track the achievement in 2 ways: the course competency achievement as measured by students. So I'll start with that one. That's the number 1 listed. So the way we do that is we conduct course surveys each semester. So we pull the competencies for that particular course, for all of the courses from that semester, and the competencies are listed in the syllabus. So we pull all of those, and then we survey students at the conclusion of the semester, each competency and their perceived level of attainment on that competency on a 4-point scale, which I'll show you in a minute. Those results are organized in aggregate form. And secondly, we also survey the students on each competency at the beginning of each of the program. So we So let me just stop for just a second, go back to the course. So we have two buckets. We have the course. So we're really tracking course by course in aggregate form throughout the program. And then we have the personal, the student journey from the beginning of orientation through graduation. And we do that in a couple of different ways. We track them at the beginning of the program, where are they at in all of the competencies, and then at graduation right about now, where did you land at the conclusion of the program? And then in the middle, we do semester by semester. So we really are intertwining a program level orientation to the competencies and personal student development. So let me go back to the overall program one. So this is an example of the end of semester course competency survey that we would give to students. It's just one competency to show you what it would look like. So again, it's on a 4-point scale. And then once we get these back, we share them back again with the students in aggregate form in a debrief. So at the end of a semester, we'll have a quick debrief with the students on how the semester went, also a preview of what's to come in the next semester. But we take the time during that to understand and to look in particular at courses that might have more variability or even some disagreement in where students landed in terms of whether or not they achieved that competency or not. It has been really helpful to add insights to the program and to the faculty around where there may be overlap with other courses, for an example, or gaps from other courses, or a gap of understanding before they got to the course. So it really does help us frame that. So we share the data from this with each faculty for their course, for their individual course. So it's the data that you see here, as well as some open free text that the students provide feedback on improving the courses. I will say this is a balance and a complement to our SRTs, our student rating of teaching, that are the official end of the course evaluation that the school does. So it's a little bit of a balance to make sure that we're getting students to complete both. But this has really provided some really rich data for us in understanding why students might perceive that they're not achieving a particular competency level. We can do a little bit of deeper dive in that face-to-face session. And then let me go to the next one. Yeah, I think we go to the next one. So the next one is looking at individual students. So now we're going to sort of turn the mirror the other way. Instead of looking at the full courses, now we're going to look at student performance around and achievement around the competencies. So the first thing that we do is we do the beginning and the end of the program. So we're getting a gauge of growth for the students. But we also do a semester by semester review of each student with each competency. So around the time that faculty are doing grading for a course, we will then submit to the faculty the name of all of the students, and then the listing of the competencies that they have, that the faculty have identified for their course for that semester. And then the faculty will then rate the student and their achievement level for just that discrete point of time, just that semester that they observed in course through coursework and otherwise. And then we're collecting that information over time. So each student will have a gauge on their own individual growth in each competency area, semester over semester. Along the way, I will mention too, we have 2 courses that are designed particularly around the reflection, the assessments, the professional development and leadership. So that's under that last piece that Katie was talking about, self-awareness, self-development, and values specifically. So we have 2 courses that are looking at that. So this gives you an idea of what the kind of work that the faculty are doing. So again, the name is where it's blacked out on the left, and then the particular competencies are listed across the top. Each faculty, I don't want to get this far into the details, but each faculty has their own tab, so they can go specifically to their own course, and they can look only at their competencies, try to keep it as simple as possible, and then give a student evaluation. The goal is for us to then collect that data, and at the conclusion of the first year, share that back with students, and at the conclusion of their second year, share that back with students so they can see the progression over time. So we are now piloting that part that I just talked about in terms of students taking a look at an understanding of their progression. So idea is that we will have a student view so that they can look at each course and see each competency. And then also we have identified, I think through the language at the top, you can see that we're saying to the students that we're not expecting, as Katie said at the beginning, for them to get to a level 4 for all of them or even for many of them. So where is our expected level that they will land at the conclusion of the program? And then we're also building out talking points for both advisors and career coaches around how to use this information. So an example could be, if you're at the end of the first year, the conclusion of the second semester, let's say the students are not trying to pick on one easy one. Public speaking is an easy one that shows up in several different courses. So let's say they weren't performing at a very high level or hadn't achieved a very high level. There'd be great discussion opportunities there with coaches and with advisors to think about what kind of electives the students are taking the second year, and also opportunities for students to jump into some professional development or extracurricular work to sort of augment their learning in addition to the classroom. I should also mention that everything that we're talking about here is done both across the executive and the residential sides of our house. And I think I will hand it back over to Justine to go through some of the DEI augments that we've made.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. So we talked about the history of NCHL competencies and our engagement. We discussed our model and then how we use it and our data collection and sharing. Now we want to discuss an effort that we kicked off in 2019. And as we all know, that is the year right before COVID and also the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. So we had on our list to look at our curriculum and look holistically from a DE&I lens. However, 2020 just accelerated our work, and we had student interest in engaging in this via a letter that they sent to all of us on the leadership team, asking for us to immediately look at our curriculum through the DE&I lens. So we had a group of an alumni, tenure track faculty, researcher, myself, and students, along with other stakeholders along the way, looking at our competencies and understanding the language in them and how that cascades then to the assignments, to the courses, et cetera, and had some pretty meaningful conversations. And I wanted to show you our initial result. I think as I reveal a few of the competencies that we revised, I want to recognize that this is our first pass at this. I think there's more work that needs to be done as a community. However, we are just sort of being vulnerable here and sharing with you what we've come up with initially, knowing that there could be a need to further enhance these. And I do think practice and those in organizations could also help us as we look at our competencies through the DE&I lens. So 2 of the competencies that were a little more obvious for us to look at were community orientation, which is called community collaboration in the NCHL model, and then addressing inequities and promoting and inclusion. So for the community orientation, we really wanted to add the idea of empathy, critical self-reflection, lived experiences, and making this more about the community and less about aligning one's specific reaction to the community. It seemed a little bit more focused on me versus like taking an external lens and building that awareness. And then for addressing inequities, the group felt that there wasn't a recognition of bias and inequity in that competency. And so you'll see those words as we reconfigured this description. And I have a few more examples. Others that aren't directly associated with DE&I, although there are clear lines around change leadership and interpersonal awareness. With change leadership, we really wanted it, the word stakeholder is there. However, the idea of engaging and amplifying diverse views was something that our students really brought to the table, and we looked at this language and adopted it as we're talking about change, that there are different levels of power within stakeholders. And so we wanted to recognize that, which goes then into self and interprofessional awareness, that the recognition of one's power and privilege was an important part that we wanted to add into the description. And then finally, an area that you wouldn't think, what is, DE&I, how can we apply this to information management? We really wanted to talk about, and I think this is all the more pertinent now with the discussions around AI, that when we develop information technology solutions that are either direct to the consumer or even internal, that we're seeking to improve operations and patient care. However, we're also taking steps to mitigate bias in the development and use of informatics and tools or tools. So that I thought was that this was a very interesting discussion, and our faculty that teaches IT was involved in this review, and I learned a lot from her as far as what we can be talking about around DE&I and information management and technology. So that, I think we have some discussion questions that we want to go over, but I think we want to move to a different topic, and we can revisit this if there are questions or further discussion. And so I'm going to hand it back to Stephanie for a final discussion question here, and then we'll hopefully spend a little bit more time together discussing the DE&I lens as well.
I had to get to my menu to unmute. I was like, where did it go? Thanks for that, Justine. we wanted to take some time to open up the discussion a little bit on something that we've had lots of discussions about internally, and also with many of you and colleagues, around acknowledging that all of the students right now that are in master's programs were in undergrad as COVID emerged, and we're starting to see some differences in preparation with students, and maybe one could say they were at a disadvantage in some ways. And we've been talking about a lot relatively recently, just yesterday, actually, kind of thinking about this today. I was listening to a podcast from an undergrad faculty who was reflecting and thinking about how to respond to this particular faculty teaches seniors and undergrads, so not that different than certainly our first year MHA students. And he has a long history of teaching, and his experience the last couple of years has been that the openness that he had previously put into his class, the ability to really be curious and to be really to take the class or take some of the assignments in a direction that means the most to you, that he has found that to be paralyzing. It was his word for students, and that he is having to put in place a lot more scaffolding around specific assignments, specific achievement measures, specific dates. I mean, really kind of reining things in. And he was clear to say, I'm not trying to make this more difficult, or I'm not trying to be more strict. It's that he's observing that students need a lot more structure than they maybe did a couple of years ago. So we were curious, and it seemed really relevant to where we're at, kind of particularly as is highlighted at the bottom here, in some of the self-awareness areas and self-development and professional development skills, all of those kinds of things that we're seeing that we need to spend more attention, put more attention on, and spend more time on than I think we did even 5 years ago. So we're curious about what others are seeing with their own students, and any takeaways that you might have in this space.
Yeah, this is it's interesting that you framed it that way, because we have seen that as well. And we're kind of like, is it that they've gone through COVID? Is it a COVID thing? Is it a generational thing? Is it no, what is that? So we've seen it. And I like your idea, and I don't have any thoughts right off the top of my head, but like, are there things that we could be doing? Like, is some of the work around, like we were talking around the coaching or sort of helping students think about their education differently, or think about their place in how they navigate things differently, because we try to work with them about growth mindset, navigating ambiguity and all of that, but it's like it's hard. It's just hard. It's hard to crack. So I don't have a great solution, but I do appreciate the challenge, and I really appreciate the recognition that it's gotten harder.
I would agree at UAB as well. It's almost like they don't want to be together somewhat, because they got so used to Zoom classes, and there is definitely a pushback a little bit to their thoughts, and are they seeing it as well, and what can we do to try to work together to maybe make sure they're really ready for the workforce.
Just before we hear from practitioners, I want to add something quickly to this discussion. In addition to them going through an isolating time during college, even previous to that, if you think about the things that led up to that isolation, even previous to that, this is a generation that has grown up texting each other quickly and being subjected to a lot of bullying, in those electronic spaces. And just to kind of bring that into the discussion, just before our students go off for their summer internships, we go, even though we've talked about it all year, we go into another reminder about you need to let yourself be very vulnerable to your internship. You need to talk to your preceptor about the Sloan, the Sloan competencies in our case. Tell them that you're looking to improve on these things. Ask them that at the end of the summer, you get really hard feedback on how you did. Did you build on these competencies? Did you have difficulty and so forth? And coaching a student to want to accept feedback over the summer in such a real way is downright difficult on them, because they've been in a zone where teenagers are just brutal on each other, whether it's height, weight, SAT scores, although those are kind of thrown out now, but just anything that you can get bullied about. It's hard for students to understand feedback from a person who really cares about you can be really helpful. And so we have to go through this reminder of just be mindful and accept constructive criticism and move forward, raise your competencies, and then come back and tell us how you did. I don't know, it's challenging for students right now. So I wanted to throw that out there because it's the practitioners who will have them in their hands over the summer. So I just wanted to bring up that point.
Kathy, can I add your comment, and then I'll stop. Is the only other thing that comes to my mind too is just sort of the way education has gone. There's so there's more structure at earlier levels of education, which is then the desire for more structure at ours, and probably then going into the work world, which is like, it isn't there as much. Part of the work is you figuring it out.
Right. And maybe at the practitioner level, there's this in all age groups too. There's a component of it of like, we're all facing some of these challenges. However, we have like a history of how we've worked together that's sort of being challenged now. in many different ways. So it's hard to then sort out, well, what are the good things about how this has changed, and what are the things that will really hold the students back? And that's where I think a conversation with practitioners would be helpful, of like, what expectations around professionalism, around hybrid work, around dress, are changing, and how can we ensure that we're teaching to that? Or is it just become different for students, which I doubt that that's the case. So.
Do you think that, and I don't know from the perspective of leaders in organization, like for any of you, whether that be in a healthcare institution or a higher education institution, do you find that there are cultural barriers sometimes, or differences in terms of how individuals are able to receive feedback? I had a conversation about coaching with a healthcare leader who's in a southern state, and who said that they've had to work really hard with their leaders about how to give constructive criticism or feedback, because the culture is very like, you're supposed to be nice to people and you're not supposed to make waves, and we, that southern hospitality. And that she's also found that when leaders come from a place like where I'm from, Boston, and they're very direct and to the point, and everything is go, go, go all the time, and they're coming from a very different culture, that people, when they're giving feedback, people go, oh my gosh, that person's so mean. Like, I don't like working with this person. I don't like this feedback. And so I wonder too, how we get around some of that, because some of it may be geographical, and many people in their careers may move for administrative fellowships, they may move for school and then move back somewhere else. So I wonder how we're teaching or preparing individuals, I guess, to either adapt to those new cultures, or to be, I don't want to say that anybody should feel like someone's being mean to them. But I know I appreciate direct feedback in terms of growth. So I'm kind of interested in it. Have you seen that at all? And what do we do about it?
I see that as sort of starting with us in our institutions. Cornell, even up to the level of our Cornell president, puts out things about the agenda and the way we're going to operate. And it might be very different than someone's undergraduate experience. And I've had Sloan students, come and tell me, I knew coming to Cornell was going to be a shell shock, but I didn't anticipate X, Y, or Z. And we talked through that. And I'm glad they bring it up, because they're basically saying like, wow, this is really different for me. And that's actually helpful. And, the students who can do that, and to the point where we can encourage students to do that, those are the students who really have like the most confidence in bringing forth, like, I have this concern about operating within this context, or I had a concern with what that person said, and things like that. That's actually extremely helpful, because the people who can talk about things that are uncomfortable tend to be the people with the most confidence. And so you have to sort of put it in that context. It's the students who just clam up and aren't engaging, and we don't hear from, are the ones we worry about most. One thing we actually do it in the fall, probably about 2 months in, because we've sort of seen that after the first exams have passed and students start comparing themselves to each other, and you get that feeling of, do I belong here? Are they better than I am? This whole thing. We do a wellness survey, because we specifically want to reach the students who maybe aren't talking about us. But we've done this for about 3 years now, and every wellness survey, we love the fact that some students are raising their hands saying like, I'm really not well. And sometimes we can handle it within the department, but most often we actually have students like go get counseling at Cornell Health Center because we know they're really good for students. But it's basically fostering, just having discussions that will open you up and raise your bar and know that this is a safe space and know we're going to have your back and so forth. Some students are just better at doing that and raising their hands than other students. But we have to take care of all the students, and making them well and adjusted and confident during that first year is so critical in order for them to have any meaningful summer internship. But it really does go back to a discussion about competencies, being comfortable describing when you're not comfortable with a competency and so forth. So it's a whole language, but I just wanted to make the point that even though we've been talking about competencies, it's easy for them in their busy day and academics and exams to sort of forget, like, oh yeah, there's this set of competencies and I need to be thinking about that as I go into the summer. It sort of ties in all of today's presentations, you know, the wellness and straight through it. It just all ties and swirls. It's kind of unbelievable when you put it into a structure like today. It's helpful and it reminds us all the things we need to tie in together.
Yeah, Kathy, I would add to that. I mean, I think we have to remember the students come to us with all different levels of capability, and they come to us, you know, some of them are ready to be vulnerable and they're open and they're ready to accept feedback and just kind of roll with it. But there's certainly the others who are those reticent to engage. And I know Julie talked about that. I think we're seeing even more reticence to engage than perhaps ever before. And so I think, you know, whatever ways, whether it's the counseling or whether it's coaching or just the exposure to others who are being vulnerable, and kind of that contagion of understanding the ways of being and what constitutes, you know, an open learning system for a healthcare leader. You know, I think all of that, it's like you have to sort of be imbued with that over a period of time. But I think we have to be aware of that. I love this conversation. And I think, Ren, as you were talking, I was also thinking of the gendered issue that we have to deal with as well within their fellowships, and cultures around gender as well, and some sensitivity to that and openness and exploring ways in which we can support these students. I'll turn it back to you, Justine, or the more conversation here.
Yeah, I think one other series of conversations we were hoping to have, I don't know if we have a few more minutes, was just any reaction to the DE&I review that we did on the competencies specific to DE&I, and then also any thoughts around other types of topics that we think need to be not one competency, but sort of throughout our competencies.
I do have, first of all, I love that you did that work. We've had some of the same conversations about, you know, sort of how do you embed one of the things, and I appreciate how you've sort of reworded the competencies across. One of the things that popped into my mind as you were reading it, though, is the challenge of how do you assess some of those things. There's some of the things that the self-report on the assessment is pretty straightforward, but have you talked any about that? Like, because some of those some of those competencies would be really hard to design, like say an assignment that could assess it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked, and I'd love for Stephanie and Ryan and Katie to chime in, but the first step is around, like you said, the assignments, the course, the course design, and we haven't gotten to the students part of it, but the first idea was like, we don't even have this named in our in our courses and in our curriculum. How are we even, you know, providing?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep. But yeah, great point on the student part.
I would add that it has also, I think, opened up conversations with our faculty around the kind of training that they desire in this space. So once we have these deeper conversations, where do we feel that we could use as collectively or individually some more conversation and some more expertise in the room to help navigate?
Well, that's a great outcome in the short term, right? That's awesome.
Justine, just to follow up on something you said, which has been on my mind, we put out there that with the state of healthcare and all the opportunities to improve it, I won't call them all problems, there are opportunities to improve it, but there's lots of opportunities to improve healthcare right now. We are trying here to diversify the class, and so that there will be more voices at the table, more representation and so forth. But actually, when we graduate people and they go out there in the world, they may be the only one person at the table. Maybe they had a diverse class and they got to hang out in a safe space where we were trying to talk about respecting each other's and our voices and so forth. But when they actually get out there in the workplace, being loud and bold is a little bit harder than we're doing within the program, because the tables still aren't diverse and the voices still aren't there. And the early careers, that's a tough thing. Even though we just practiced it, putting that into reality is still a tough thing. I've been learning the words, incremental, and I like that word because we all want it to go much faster, but really we need to be talking about you're an incremental change. I was just studying, and as Julie has lectured about and so forth, women in the place in healthcare and how few people we still have in the C-suite. It's incremental change, even though students might have come to all our programs for a monumental big change right away. That's just not the way things happen.
Thank you. Ren, you have your hand up.
So something that I think about in terms of competencies, I think in our competency model, DE&I mostly falls under interpersonal understanding. But I wonder, what does it mean to be competent as an inclusive leader? How does one measure their success in that? And there are so many, I think, things that we attach to leadership. So especially in this day and age with the Adam Grants and the Brene Browns, where we talk about courage and bravery and being authentic. But there are a lot of implicit biases towards Black women, that when Black women are assertive, they're actually angry and aggressive. And I think that actually happens to women in general. So I want to validate that. And again, I think a lot of that is unconscious. It's something that people have developed because it's a product of the systems that we live in and the institutions that currently exist. And it's going to take conscious, intentional effort to change those systems in a way that's meaningful. But while we're working on that, how do we prepare someone to lead teams that have transgender people on them, to know that they may have people who are reporting to them if they are a person of color, if they're a religious minority, when any of these things, who have biases towards them, that may be something. I wonder just what does it mean exactly, and how do you measure the inclusivity of a leader, and how do you teach that skill? And I don't have an answer for you. I think it's just a question that I think we're trying to figure out ourselves as well.
And I think your question, Ren, of like, how do you measure that? I mean, that's a real challenge and something that we probably have to figure out.
Well, thank you everyone for your time and discussion. I think we're nearing the end, so we can wrap up the portion on the competencies.
Thank you, Justine and team, for participating today and giving us a great overview. And overall, I think the discussion today was helpful. Like someone said earlier, lots of threads throughout all of the presentations, and hope that you all had came out with learning something new and found this to be a valuable time. I'm going to pop into the chat an evaluation survey just so we can kind of get an idea of your feedback on this event, and if we were to do it again, what would we do different? We just want to make sure that we're continuing to provide a helpful opportunity for you all to connect and bridge academia and field of practice. So with that, if no one has any other questions or anything, I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all for coming. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for your work to organize this. It was great.
Thanks, everybody. Have a
Have a
good
beautiful
Bye.
day.